Welcome to Life Stories. Today, we're diving into a journey of self-discovery, resilience, and breaking free from the chains of family expectations. This is the story of a woman who spent years in the shadows of her family, overshadowed by her perfect brother and constantly feeling like a failure. But what happens when she finally finds her own path to success, only to face the harsh truths about her family's hidden dynamics? Join us as we explore the profound lessons of love, boundaries, and finding the strength to live life on your own terms. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to start today's story. I always wondered what it would be like to be the golden child in a family, the one who gets all the praise, the one everyone admires without even trying, to be the one who effortlessly fills their parents' hearts with pride while basking in the glow of constant attention from relatives. But that was never me. I had always been the shadow, the one they looked past, the one they never seemed to acknowledge no matter how hard I tried. From the start, my brother Jack was the shining star of our family. He was the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. He was strong, athletic, and excelled at everything he did. In high school, he played football and scored a few touchdowns. That was enough to make him the pride of the entire family. Everyone knew his name, and everyone admired him. My parents couldn't stop talking about him at family gatherings, proudly bragging about his athletic achievements. And there I was, the dreamy-eyed girl, always with my nose buried in a book, quietly watching from the sidelines as Jack took center stage. Growing up in a small town in Ohio meant that everyone knew everyone else's business. My reputation as the kid with no future seemed to stick with me from an early age. It didn't help that I was never the athletic type. I had asthma, and gym class was a nightmare. I hated the long runs, the way the boys would snicker when I struggled to breathe, my face turning pale as I gasped for air. Every time I couldn't keep up, I could feel the disapproval from my mother. "Eleanor, Rachel, you need to be stronger," she would sigh. "Stop making things so complicated." Her words stung, and no matter how hard I tried to push through the discomfort, I could never live up to the image of strength that she wanted me to embody. Meanwhile, Jack was thriving. He was a natural leader, always chosen as team captain. My father, Richard, who was usually silent and withdrawn, would clap Jack on the back with pride after every game. I could see the approval in his eyes. Jack could do no wrong. But I was just the girl who spent her time reading comic books and escaping into a world of fantasy. My GPA hovered around a 2.5, mediocre at best, but even then, my family found a way to compare me to Jack, who was always praised for his leadership qualities. I tried to do what was expected of me. I enrolled in college and worked part-time at a small comic book store to pay for my tuition. For me, it was a dream job, surrounded by books and games, meeting people who shared my interests. It was a place where I could be myself. But to my parents, it was just another sign that I had failed. My mother would watch me put on my uniform with a look of disappointment, asking, "Do you really want to spend your whole life working in a store that sells kids' stuff?" The question cut deep, but I knew that no matter how much I explained, she wouldn't understand. She couldn't see how much I loved it there. To her, it wasn't enough. As the years passed, the comparisons to Jack only grew stronger. He had a stable job at a car dealership, a big house with a neatly trimmed lawn, a quiet wife named Rachel, and two boys who ran around with footballs in their hands, living the picture-perfect life my parents always dreamed of. And me? I was still working at the comic book store, still being looked at with disappointment. I felt invisible, like no matter how hard I tried, I would never be able to live up to their expectations. Sunday dinners were the worst. I would drive nearly 2 hours to sit at a table where all the conversation revolved around Jack, his latest achievement, his new house, his perfect family. If I even mentioned my job, they would either ignore it or change the subject. It was as though I didn't matter. Every time Jack would pat me on the shoulder and tell me, "Rachel, you need to have a plan for the future. You can't keep drifting through life like this," I would just smile weakly. He didn't know what my life was really like, and I knew that even if I told him, he wouldn't understand. It wasn't that I didn't have a plan. It was just that I wasn't living the life they had imagined for me. The truth was, I had come to terms with the fact that they would never see me the way they saw Jack. No matter what I did, no matter how much I achieved, it was never enough. I was the failure. I was the one who couldn't live up to their standards. And so, I retreated into myself, quietly accepting my place in the family as the one who was always overlooked. But little did they know, I was no longer the weak, failing child they had always dismissed. I was growing into something else. Something they hadn't yet realized. I had my own life. My own dreams. And one day, I would show them that I wasn't the failure they thought I was. But that would have to wait. For now, I would sit at the table, listening to their praise of Jack, quietly waiting for the day when everything would change. As I moved through life, I learned to stop seeking approval from my parents. They were too wrapped up in their admiration for Jack to ever see me for who I really was. They saw me as nothing more than the failure of the family. A shadow who would never amount to anything. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I had something they didn't understand, a vision for my own future. A future that didn't rely on their approval. After 2 years of college, I made a decision that shocked my family. I dropped out. It wasn't that I wasn't capable, it was just that the academic world felt like a cage to me. I wasn't there to chase grades, I wanted to build something real. I didn't want to be another cog in the machine, following the same path everyone else had walked. So, I left. To my family, that was the ultimate proof of my failure. My father's cold gaze followed me when I made my announcement. And my mother's disappointed sigh rang in my ears. "You think dropping out was a smart decision?" My father asked, his voice sharp. "Jack has had a stable job for years. Why can't you learn from him?" I didn't answer. I knew it was pointless. They wouldn't understand. They never did. So, I continued working at the comic book store. But this time, it wasn't just to get by. I met a man there. A customer who shared my passion for technology. Together, we decided to take a risk and start our own IT company. The early days were tough. There were months when we barely made any money, when we could hardly afford rent. But we kept pushing forward. I was determined not to let the world, or my family, define what I could achieve. We stayed up late, working on our computers, brainstorming ideas, building something that was ours. From the ground up. The breakthrough came when we landed a major contract with a tech giant. It was the moment our lives changed. The company began to grow rapidly. And in just a few years, we were running a successful business. The excitement of watching something I had built from scratch take off was beyond anything I had ever imagined. When we sold the company to a larger corporation, I walked away with a sum of money my family couldn't even fathom. It wasn't just the money, though. It was the validation I had been seeking all along, not from my parents, but from myself. I didn't buy a mansion or a sports car to flaunt my success. That's not who I was. Instead, I bought a modest 2-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood, comfortable but far from flashy. I didn't need a grand display of wealth to prove anything to anyone. Especially not my family. I drove an old car that I loved, despite their belief that anything less than the best was a sign of failure. My family didn't know about the money I had made. To them, I was still the same girl who had dropped out of college. Still the one they couldn't take seriously. But the day came when everything changed. I found out that Jack had hired a private investigator to look into my life. It wasn't that I was surprised, he had always been resentful of me. But to hire someone just to prove I was a failure? That was a new low. I was working in cybersecurity. And when I saw the signs of a personal investigation, I couldn't ignore them. It didn't take long for me to trace it back to the detective agency Jack had hired. He hadn't been careful, and soon I had the proof in front of me. What Jack didn't expect, however, was that the investigation wouldn't reveal the failure he had been hoping for. Instead, it uncovered the truth. I was successful. I wasn't the failure he had made me out to be. I was the co-founder of a thriving tech company. And I had made a fortune in the process. For the first time, my family would know the truth. But how would they react? Would they see me for who I had become? Or would they continue to see me as the child they had always dismissed? I didn't know, but I was about to find out. It was a strange mix of emotions, relief, anger, even curiosity, knowing that the truth was finally going to come out. I had spent my whole life trying to show them that I was worthy of their love and respect. Now, the truth would be revealed, and I couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would they finally accept me for who I was? Or would they continue to look down on me, clinging to their image of the perfect family? I didn't know, but what I did know was that I was no longer the person I used to be. I had built a life of my own, a life they could never take from me. The truth was out. My family knew. They knew I wasn't the failure they had always believed me to be. But that didn't change everything overnight. My parents, especially, looked at me with wide eyes when they found out the truth. For the first time, they saw me as someone who had built a successful life on my own. Without their help, without their approval, but even then, the recognition felt incomplete. They didn't fully grasp the gravity of it. They didn't understand that my success wasn't just about the money, but about finally standing on my own 2 feet. It was my mother who first spoke, though her voice wavered with awkwardness. "Rachel, why didn't you ever tell me about your success?" she asked, as if expecting an explanation for why I hadn't shared my achievements with them. I could tell she wanted to sound happy for me, but there was a trace of guilt, a hint of discomfort in her words. I didn't even try to explain. "Did you ever care?" I asked, my voice calm, though my heart was heavy. My question hung in the air like a storm cloud, and my mother faltered, unsure of how to respond. It wasn't just my parents' shock that threw me off. It was how my brother, Jack, reacted. He couldn't handle it. For years, he had been the golden child, the one everyone admired, the one everyone aspired to be. But now, the truth was out. I had succeeded, and in his eyes, that was a direct challenge to his own carefully constructed image. At the next family dinner, Jack tried to downplay my success. "Rachel is very talented, but selling cars is a great career too," he said, folding his arms as if he were still in control. His words didn't fool anyone. He was scrambling, trying to maintain his position as the family's ideal. "Just last month, I sold the most expensive car at the dealership," he added, trying to prove that he was still worthy of their admiration. But I wasn't buying it. I had spent years living in his shadow, waiting for the moment when I would finally have a voice of my own. And now, here it was. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Are you sure about that, Jack?" He froze, and I could see the tension in his face. "Because from what I know, you have 3 unpaid mortgages, outstanding tax debt with the IRS, and your credit score is plummeting." The room went quiet. My parents stared at Jack, who was now visibly sweating, his mask of confidence slipping. My father, who had rarely spoken up in family arguments, cleared his throat and looked at Jack with an unreadable expression. Jack couldn't say anything. His facade had cracked, and there was nothing he could do to fix it. It was the first time in my life that I felt like I had the upper hand. For years, I had been dismissed, made to feel inferior, but in that moment, I knew I was no longer the person I used to be. I was no longer the quiet, overlooked girl. I was someone who had built a life for herself, someone who had earned her place in the world. But I didn't stop there. I wanted Jack to understand that he wasn't the perfect person he had always made himself out to be. I hired the same private investigator he had hired to dig into my life, to turn the tables on him. When I arrived at my parents' house that evening, I pulled out the documents I had gathered and laid them out in front of him. "Jack," I said, my voice steady, "you invaded my privacy just to prove that I was a failure. But it turns out you're the one with the real problems." The room was filled with a thick silence. My mother looked at Jack in disbelief, her hand clutching her chest as if she were seeing him for the first time. "Henry, what is this about?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jack couldn't answer right away, and for the first time, I saw him in a light that was not clouded by his own lies. He was shaking with anger now. "You've always been jealous of me, haven't you?" he shouted. his voice breaking. I've carried this family on my back my whole life. And you've done nothing but make me look bad. I met his gaze, my voice unwavering. Jealous. Jack? There is nothing about you that I would ever envy. The storm had finally broken. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about finally standing up for myself. Finally letting my family know that I had value. Not because of the money I made, but because of the person I had become. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their love. What mattered was that I was free. The journey wasn't easy. The next few weeks were filled with tension. And I knew that Jack would never let go of his pride. But I had learned something valuable through all of this. I didn't need my family's validation to feel worthy. I had built my own life. And I was proud of it. I still kept a distance from my family. The weekly Sunday dinners had stopped. And I no longer felt compelled to show up and endure their judgment. I knew that I was the one in control now. I had learned to set boundaries. I was no longer the person who lived to please others. For the first time in my life, I was living for myself. As the weeks went by, I began to rebuild my life on my own terms. I no longer felt like the person trapped under the weight of my family's expectations. The freedom that came with setting boundaries was liberating. I could finally breathe, knowing I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. My parents still tried to pull me back into the old dynamic. But I wasn't the same person I once was. I no longer let their guilt trips or manipulations control my life. My relationship with Luca grew stronger. And he became my support system, always reminding me of the importance of protecting my boundaries. He showed me that love and family could still exist. But it had to be on my terms. And for the first time in my life, I was no longer chasing approval. I was finally living in alignment with my own values. I still met with my family occasionally. But the meetings were shorter and more controlled. No longer did I feel the need to sit through long dinners filled with comparisons to Jack or guilt-laden conversations about what I hadn't done. I no longer felt diminished by their words. Looking back, I realized that my worth wasn't tied to what my family thought of me. Nor was it bound to any expectations others had for me. I had found peace in embracing who I truly was. And as I continued to move forward, I was no longer searching for validation. The only approval I needed was my own. Thank you for following my journey. If you've ever faced a similar challenge, or if you have any thoughts on how you found freedom in your own life, feel free to share them in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more life stories that inspire and empower.